Hi guys, welcome to the video. So this week we're in chapter 18, the ADA, Americans with Disability Act. Okay, accessibility. Okay, so why do we study the ADA? Right? Why we even bother? Well, there's a couple reasons. The first one, the most obvious one, is we don't want to get in trouble. Right? We want to be compliant. We want to follow the rules. If they're being enforced, we want to follow them so we don't get fined. We don't get in trouble. All right, that's number one. Self-preservation, if you will. All right. The second one is we want to know what the rules are, so we don't do more than we have to. Now, some of you might say to yourselves, well, when you're talking about accessibility for disabled folks, more is better, and I agree. All right. However, not to the point of going out of business because you spend all your money doing things you don't need to do. Okay. So there is a tendency for folks to just get really paranoid. When the government's coming down on the rules, they just do a bunch of different stuff, and then they listen to bad advice. Oh, you got to do this, you got to do that, without checking into themselves what is actually a requirement, what has to be done, what doesn't have to be done, and then the gray area in between. All right. So that's the second reason why we want to study the ADA. So we do what has to be done, but within reason. Because again, doing too much, doing things that's unreasonable. Spending money on things that you don't even have to do because someone told you that you had to do that had no business telling you anything. Put yourself out of business. You've done nobody any good. All right. It doesn't matter if it's accessible to a building that's out of business. Okay. So anyway, just going to talk about a couple of things. I'm only going to talk about really one topic. There's a lot of in-depth stuff in the chapter, and I expect you all to read it. All right. But the one thing I'm going to talk about is that a lot of students find somewhat confusing, and I'll try to do my best to explain it in a way that it's not, is the 20% path of travel rule. Now, before we get into that, I want to talk about the whole idea of rules, okay? Anybody who's been in this business for more than 20 minutes has had a manager or listened to somebody who complains about rules. All right, whether it's the ADA, whether it's the health inspector or whatnot, right? The government puts rules on us. Sometimes from our point of view, they seem unreasonable. They're very expensive to comply, and complain. Okay, and I get that. I've been there. I get it. All right, but when we're talking about the ADA, let's just think about this. The ADA, one word. If we had to describe what it's about. In one word, it would be accessibility. Okay? Accessibility. All right? Now, we are the hospitality industry. The word hospitality is defined in a one-word definition. It could be defined in one word as welcoming. Okay? Accessibility could be defined the same way. Well, I mean, there's nuances, but the bottom line is, if we're not accessible, we're not welcoming. All right. So if we're truly going to embody the spirit of hospitality, we have to be accessible. We have to do what we can to meet the requirements to make sure that as many people as possible come in without a problem. And yes, they might be able to muscle their way in through with a wheelchair, but is that welcoming? If they have to work extra hard instead of just being able to roll in, and it's not, right? So let's be welcoming. Okay. So 20% path of travel rule. There's a couple things I have to say for background for this before I get into it. And that is ADA says a bunch of things have to be done. Does that mean that if we don't do it, we get thrown thrown in jail and put out of business, stuff like that? No. All right. Rules are somewhat meant to be reasonable. All right. There's a couple things. Couple terms that apply here, and that is readily achievable and reasonably accommodating. All right. So yes, it would be beautiful to have everything perfect, right? But it's not readily achievable to do that. So we need to do what we can, which is reasonable, have reasonable accommodations in lieu of doing everything, because we just can't do everything because it's not readily achievable. Consider a building that's been around since the 1870s. Okay, you have a building that's been around the 1870s, and the business has been around since before the ADA. it can't be expected to re-engineer a 150-year-old building to meet 2024, 2025 standards, right? That's kind of unreasonable, right? It would cost a lot of money. And sometimes it's just even little problems, right? You might have a thing where it says that this little step, which would be in the path of travel of a wheelchair, is incompliant. And to fix it, though, it's not easy because of the way it was engineered back in the 1800s. To fix it, it's one of those things. If you do this, then you have to do that, then you have to do this, and you have mission creep. Because if I rip out one thing, then I start worrying about the integrity of the building and stuff like that. So to find out, just to fix a maybe 6-inch step would cost $500,000. All right, that might be somewhat of an extreme example, but it's out there. All right, things like that happen. So reasonable accommodations or reasonable achievable is definitely something that is considered. Okay, so having said that, stands to reason that there's probably businesses out there that aren't 100% accessible in every single way they could be. All right, and that's okay to a point. All right, but let's just say now it's a new business. You have to be compliant. But let's also say that it's an old business, an old building that's being upgraded. Okay, so stands to reason that you would say, okay, you're doing an upgrade, now you have to be fully compliant. Well, they go beyond that. They don't enforce that either. All right, they have the 20% rule, the 20% path of travel rule. Now, when it's talking about compliance, they're concerned with one thing: the path of travel. Getting someone with a disability, or anybody for that matter, from point A to point B, that path, okay? So that has to be considered. What is a path of travel? Point A being the point where they come into our property. Now, if we have a half a mile long driveway with the big gates or whatever, and they have to drive up there or walk or whatever, that's the point where they go from the public property to our property, okay? Now, if you're in the inner city and it's right off the street, and then the property abuts right to the city street, well, then that's the point. Okay, that's the point A, if you will. All right, to point A to point B being to where people are going to do what they're going to do in our property. Okay, so there's going to be many different paths of travel, right? In a hotel, you're going to have paths of travel from the street to the lobby, to the room, to the restaurant, to all the different amenities. All those things are paths of travel, right? So the 20% path of travel rule states that when we are doing a remodeling or a refurbishment or whatever you want to call it to an area, the path of travel to that new area has to be considered. All right, what do you mean by that? Well, let's just use numbers here. We are budgeted $100,000 to do renovations in a group of rooms. $100,000. 20%, you would think, okay, so 20% of $100,000 is $20,000. So we have to spend $80,000 on the remodel and $20,000 on the what do you call it? On the path of travel, making sure that it's accessible as possible. That's not what it's saying. What it's saying is if it's $100,000, you have to add 20%. So 1.20, you multiply your budget by. Okay, so $100,000 renovation turns into $120,000 money spent. Okay, possibly. Okay, why I say possibly is if it's a relatively new building and the path of travel is not changing, the renovation is going the same place, the path of travel is the same, and there's no upgrades needed, you don't have to spend that money. Okay, let's just say it's changed a little bit. Okay, or it's an older building and there is problems, but there's only $10,000 worth of problems. Again, for that $100,000 budget, all you have to do is spend $10,000 to fix that. All right, and what do I mean by fix it? Make it as accessible as possible. Meet the requirements, the things stipulated in the ADA that make it fully accessible for different folks. Okay, so $100,000 turns to $120,000. We have $10,000 worth of fixes to be done. the budget turns into $110,000. Let's just say there's $50,000 worth of renovations that need to be done. Now, let's just say if the ADA said that if there's $50,000 that need to be done, you need to spend the $50,000. Well, no one would do anything. No one would do any remodeling because they can't afford $150,000. All right. So the ADA 20% path of travel rule states that you have to spend that 20%. All right. So if it's a $50,000 fix or $50,000 worth of fixes that need to happen to make it fully accessible, you only have to spend $20,000. Again, the $100,000 turns to $120,000 and only $120,000. Okay. So that is the 20% rule in a nutshell. Okay. Hopefully I explained it in a way that you can understand it. All right. There's probably a lot of nuances and lawyers will crawl up that in a way that I am not capable of explaining, but that's it in a nutshell. Now, again, we have a little Easter egg this week for this video. For those of you who watched one of last week's videos, I asked a question and I expected an answer within the comments of the YouTube video. Extra credit, great. Those of you who took advantage of that, you got some points. Those of you who didn't, oh well. But this is a new week. However, one of the issues I have with that is what I asked you to do is answer the question in the comments, the YouTube comments. So you need to open in YouTube, write a comment. One thing I did not anticipate is just how different from your names some of your account names are. All right. So please, I'm going to ask a question. You're going to do it again this week for more extra credit. But when you do it this week, start with "this is so-and-so." All right. Now, I mean, some of them were kind of confusing last week, and quite frankly, I got over it. I mean, I figured it out, but make it easy on me, please. Okay. All right. So the question is this. All right. $200,000 budget for renovating a ballroom. Okay. So $200,000. All right. That's what we want to do. We have a big project, $200,000. The ballroom. All right. So we're not, the path of travel that we're dealing with now is the property line to the ballroom. And you might even take into consideration the path of travel from rooms to the ballroom. Okay. So path of travel for that, it's an old place. There's $75,000 worth of stuff that needs to be done. Okay. So there's $75,000 worth of stuff to be done on a $200,000 budget. How much money will we have to dedicate to the path of travel? You can give me the total or just the money that's above the $200,000, whatever. But how much money needs to be dedicated to the path of travel to be compliant with the ADA 20% path of travel rule? Put it in the comments, put your name, and I will see you guys in the next video.